Welcome back to my channel. My name is Marianne Vanderduzen. I'm an artist and educator, and in this tutorial I will be walking you through my process, start to finish, of my realism oil painting of a poppy field. I am so excited to share this painting with you, as it's hands down one of the most vibrant pieces I've ever made. It's also an incredibly meaningful painting to me, as it was painted to commemorate my family's links to World War II. As always, I'd love if you'd like, subscribe, and comment on this video to help me continue to build this channel. Let's get started. I began this painting on my primed, toned, and sanded canvas using my usual ground of yellow ochre. One of the strategies I use with sunset skies is maintaining purity of color close to the sun. Near the light source, I was using paints almost straight out of the tube, starting with the color that had the lightest value, which was Winsor Lemon by Winsor & Newton. As I moved away from the immediate radius of the sun, I started using colors with inherently darker values, but that were still quite pure. Here, I started mixing together cadmium yellow medium, which is slightly darker than the Winsor Lemon, and cadmium orange. If I needed to lighten them, I would use a hint of titanium white, and if I needed to tone the color so that it wasn't quite so pure or saturated, I would use its complementary opposite. In the language of color, we use the word tints to describe colors that have had white added, shades for colors that have had black, and tones for colors that have had gray. However, I find it sometimes difficult to describe how I approach mixing colors because I don't use black to mix my shades, and because my grays naturally occur as a result of mixing complementary colors. When I use the word toning in this tutorial, what I am referring to is naturally canceling out or dialing back saturation by adding the color opposite on the wheel. So when I want to make my yellows less vibrant, I'll use a hint of purple. If I want the oranges to be less saturated, I'll add a smidgen of blue. Sometimes adding a hint of blue can make the oranges take on a green tinge, but adding a hint of red, which is green's opposite, helps counteract this. When I was painting the sky, the further away from the sun my colors were, the darker and more toned they became. I kept the blend smooth by repeatedly running my brush over the transitions from one color into another, using long, light-pressured strokes. In my skies, even with clouds, I like to ensure that everything is blended to create a soft realism. I mix my colors on the palette in advance before applying them and ensure that each color is built off of the previous, so there is an inherently smooth transition. When it was time for the horizon line and midground of the painting, I worked from left to right because I wanted to put the background in alla prima, or all in one pass. I like to keep my backgrounds typically quite soft and not too detailed, so I like the gentle haziness that a single layer provides. As I got closer to the sun, I warmed the colors of the backdrop slowly from a very toned grayish green to a warm, hot orange. One of my favorite tricks for working with light is not only paying close attention to the light source itself, but also paying attention to how the light strikes objects. For example, the closer the landscape became to the sun, the lighter and warmer it became, moving from greens on the outer edges slowly into purplish reds, then warming up gradually to pure orange. Similarly, because the sunlight was so warm, all of the highlights on the trees and surrounding landscape were subtle variations on whatever color was striking it. If the tree was closer to the sun, it would become a lighter orange. The further away, the cooler and less intense the highlight became. From there, it was on to the flowers. This was where I discovered just how transparent most red paints are. With every stroke, I could see the canvas underneath. However, because I toned my canvas using yellow ochre paint when I was first applying my gesso, the flowers were layered on a warm background, which helped offset their transparency. I noticed particularly when I was doing the darker sections of the flowers that my brush strokes were very visible and that the first layer was looking scratchy. However, it's important not to get too discouraged by the first layer because a second pass on the painting allows you to correct, adjust, and deepen saturation, particularly when working with transparent colors. It's here that I'd like to thank incredible photographer Rachel Baker of Facebook's Dorset Delights and Instagram's Saints Mad Mama for granting permission for me to use her wonderful photo as my reference. I've linked all of her social media platforms below as her work is breathtaking. Thank you so much, Rachel, for the privilege of painting your photo. I added in the flowers first before adding in the field and the background for two reasons. The first was because of how transparent the reds were. I was afraid that if I added them in after the field, they would appear muddy because they were resting on top of greens. The second was because this composition was incredibly busy, with dozens and dozens of poppies, and I wanted to focus on adding them in first so that I wouldn't get lost. Before I started on the greens of the field, I added in a thin layer of burnt umber. Burnt umber dries incredibly fast on its own, so it's nice to use as a dark layer if you want to prevent the lighter tones of the canvas from shining through. Additionally, burnt umber has a reddish warmth to it, and since red is a complementary opposite to green, adding in the brown would ensure that the greens layered on top would remain grounded, earthy, and not overly green. Truthfully, I was intimidated by the sheer amount of detail present in the field. My first thought was to just take my time and carefully plunk in each and every stem. But I soon realized that this would be impossible. So instead, I focused on more abstract shapes that, when viewed as a whole, would suggest to the viewer a meadow full of stems and details. I isolated a few different colors. Orangey greens where the sunlight was striking, some coral highlights where it was reflecting light off of the poppies, dark shadows, and the basic stem color, and chopped them randomly into each other. Afterwards, I'd soften them by blending over between the various colors with a clean brush. When the lines were too hard, they were distracting from the poppies because there was simply too much detail present competing for the viewer's eye. However, when they were softened, they added to the composition without directly competing. It was soon time for the second layer. I absolutely love the second layer on paintings because it's usually not nearly as time-consuming as the first, and because it's where I can build depth through subsequent color applications. This was where I had the chance to amend the streaky strokes on the blossoms, tighten up edges that had little mistakes, and add highlights. I like to add the highlights in the second layer so I can really think about how the light is working as a whole on the piece. This was where I realized that some of the blossoms actually had cool, blue-toned highlights, which balanced nicely against the corals and oranges coming from the sun. In order to ensure that the sun remained as the brightest, lightest value in the painting, even my highlights are tinted with various colors. close to the sun, the highlights are tinted yellow, and the further away they get, they become softer and cooler, just like how I made the background hills. I'd like to take a minute to discuss this painting's personal significance to me. This piece was commissioned by my parents after their visit to the World War II sites of Europe back in 2019, which included being present at the ceremony commemorating the 75th anniversary of Juno Beach. My grandfather was a child in the Netherlands during World War II, who risked his life by acting as a messenger for the Dutch resistance during the Nazi occupation, delivering notes in secret on his bicycle. In the years following the war, his family made the difficult decision to leave Europe and emigrate to Canada, and I am a proud third-generation Dutch Canadian. I remain exceptionally grateful to the Canadian Armed Forces who participated in the liberation of Europe, and to the brave men and women who have served or continue to serve our country. And there you have it, the finished piece. Thank you so much for following along with this tutorial, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to write me a comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Prints of this painting are available through the description, and I am donating a portion of the sales from all Poppy prints to Wounded Warriors Canada. You can follow me on Instagram at Marianne Vanderdusen and on Facebook by searching Marianne Vanderdusen Visual Artist. You can also download my free 36-page Introduction to Acrylic Painting ebook and join my free Facebook Art Incubator support group through the link in the description below. Keep making your life beautiful, and I'll see you in the next video.